And do you think is there a time frame for when someone should actually consider being inconsistent essentially and trying something different? Like, how do you know you're telling the right message in the first place and stay consistent with that same message versus changing the message and go with something else? Like, it takes consistency almost implies doing it for a certain period of time.
Well, you're forgetting that in between change and doing what you're doing, there's a word called nuance. And you're going to live in the nuance. Those that don't are typically the ones that fail. It's like, look, I've decided this is my message. I don't care what the audience says. I'm going with it. That's not what happens. You do a podcast, you interview 4 or 5 guests, and on one of those guests, you get 3 messages and you go, oh, the audience is telling you which direction to go in. I need more guests or topics that are similar to that. And then I can use those emails, those people, those interactions as interested people. It goes back to Kevin Kelly's 100 fans that everyone talks about. It's so true that I have people now where I get Facebook messages and LinkedIn messages when there's typos in my articles and they're like, hey, I'm really sorry. I'm like, no, don't be sorry. Like, I love you. Thank you. Because it means you read it, you captured something, you're helping me. Like, we are now BFFs. We are elbowing, we are going to walk together like the Wizard of Oz down the yellow brick road. You're coming along. You're on the journey. So the problem I hear is, or I see typically is there's a strategy and some deployment, and then they worry about change being like some 180. Where I'm like, no, there's a lot of nuance in between. This is our message, and now we have to change 100%. I don't think that that's always true. And a lot of times what you see when something's really successful or starts getting a bit of the momentum or flywheel effect is it's playing in those nuances. It's slowly picking up on what they're hearing from the market versus this big drastic change. But going back to what we said earlier, it happens to be usually a bigger problem when brands make that change and they're not really a part of that market. And that's where you see that collapse and the erosion. But a lot of times the nuance makes perfect sense, even if you wanted to talk about Labubos, which everyone wants to talk about. Suddenly they start working, Pop Mart starts working with a Disney or starts licensing. And you're like, oh, like that's really different, but I get it. The power of Star Wars and Labubu is a plus. It's a plus multiplier versus, we're Labubu and now we're in the business of making puffer jackets.
Right. They're still playing in, basically what you're saying is they're still playing in their market. And so it makes sense for them and it's expanding it, but it's still within I almost think of it as like a wave, right? Some days there's waves that are really high. Some days there's waves that are essentially very low, but it's still a general wave hitting the shore. It's kind of the same thing. And it just depends on the frequency. And so you can change within that, but you can't change the nature of pushing it, maybe the nature of an ocean in a sense.
But the nuance is so interesting. So if you think about, like, for those who don't know Labubu, it's essentially a blind box stuffy. You get a blind box, you choose it, there's different series, right? So, but the idea, like, you could do multiple series. Okay, that's interesting. You could do a mystery one even. Okay, that's interesting. It's collectible, so now you're playing in a different space. I could make it smaller. I could make it much bigger. I can take away the surprise and create a premium. I could license it to get, like, you can start slicing it where the nuance becomes these unfettered, beautiful sized markets that are very dynamic and different and established versus that idea of making this massive, crazy leap because we think it's wrong or off.
Okay, so that makes a ton of sense for founders. And then is there any way, using Labubu as sort of an example maybe to start with, like, how do you know you've hit on the right thing to keep focusing on? In other words, like, how do you know in that very early day where, like, okay, I generally have the right angle. Maybe it's not the perfect message, but it's in the right general space that, like, something is working. I mean, is it just to your point of, like, economic value? You've started creating some economic value, so let's just keep hitting it.
Look, my initial gut answer was money. People are willing to pay you for your product or service. And then I was reflecting more on something Avinash Kaushik used to always say. Avinash was the analytics evangelist at Google. He's written some great books. He's still a fantastic writer now. He's in the agency side. But he used to say a customer is someone who's bought from you more than once. Perhaps as I'm getting older, I start recognizing what that really means. Getting aside like loyalty programs and loyalty points and all that chaos. But this idea that if someone has not just bought from you, but then bought from you again. And then obviously you look at things like we have all the scoring systems around how likely is it that they would refer you to someone else? Like, you have all of these types of scores and systems. I think those are all interesting and valuable. But it's this idea of really nurturing a real customer, this person who's keeps showing up and wants more from you. And why is that? Who are they? What space do they occupy? Is that who we thought the customer was? What other products are they needing? How does that evolve? Those conversations are so powerful. And again, I took it for granted. I have to admit, being an agency person, you would sit down with clients every day, B2B, B2C, small, medium, large, national, multinational, and they would just tell you the problems. And you would come to them with solutions. I mean, this was the business of what we did forever. And when you're out of that business, you forget that that's all it was. You were listening. And so in the case of being the entrepreneur, now you have to kind of do that for yourself a little bit. You're almost coaching yourself a little bit. What is the market telling me? Where is the product? Where is the service? What are the ways I could tell this story? What isn't clicking with the people who we think the customers are? Those are all excessively fertile grounds for any entrepreneur to play in a lot.